The comments, opinions, and views shared during this program are of those individual Freemasons and do not reflect the official position of a Grand Lodge, concordant body, appendant body, Masonic Authority, or craftsmanonline.com.
Hello, and welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, the only Masonic podcast endorsed by the Grand Lodge in New York. I'm your host, Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce, and you have tuned in for our salute to the America 250 series. Yeah, before we jump into that, quick reminder, Craftsman Online, we have teamed up with Arizona State University to promote their free online course on what the founders wanted, our pursuit of happiness. You've seen it, you've heard of that in the important documents and Thomas Jefferson's inspiration. You'll uncover where that came from, and then all of the significant influences that our founding fathers, and yes, some of them being Freemasons, had as their impact on the shaping of our country. The best part is this is a free course from Arizona State University, and you, your kids, friends, brothers in lodge, students, you can even get a cool completion certificate upon finishing the module. Get more info and started at craftsmanonline.com. For this America 250 episode, we are traveling to the Commonwealth of Virginia to catch up with Worshipful Brother Wes Latchford. He is a Grand Lodge of Virginia education officer and is here to talk about the complex role Freemasons played in the American Revolution. Welcome back to the Craftsman Online Podcast, my brother.
It is good to be back and to be remembered.
Well, it's funny. I was looking at you and I'm like, when was the last time? Was it? Yeah, it was very early this year, early January. You came to my lodge in DC and you gave a really cool program on revolutionary Freemasonry. You and I started talking about America 250. That was already kind of embedded throughout your program. But it was a big question that was coming up afterwards, where we hear as modern Masons, this revolution, these rebels. And these were the brothers in the 18th century, and their actions are what, set this course of this country that we know as America and this great democracy, this program, this experiment into practice.
Yeah, so this whole thing started actually a couple of years ago, not a Johnny come lately here, where I was asked to present in a lodge, and the specific request was not the same old when it came to talking about the founding fathers who were Freemasons, right? I mean, I've had more than enough presentations and writings and research on, Worshipful Brother George Washington, or Most Worshipful Benjamin Franklin, or go down the litany of folks in the colonial era who were part of Freemasonry. And so what I started thinking about was this idea of Freemasonry being revolutionary. Right? I mean, I mentioned these names, and we have this reverence for them, not only as founding fathers, but also as Freemasons. And so the question that came to my mind was, why? These guys were in revolt against the King of England, right? And as part of our obligations and as even part of the constitutions of Masonry, we are told that we're supposed to be good citizens and obey the legislatures and the magistrates. And so the ultimate question was, then how come we exonerate, we lift these guys up, almost a godlike status, when there's this chance that they should have been brought up on Masonic charges?
To answer your question, I believe it's the reason why they didn't get brought up on Masonic charges or, spend the rest of their life in the gallows or the gallery or whatever, was because, the winner gets to dictate how the history is written. If we had lost, probably would have been a different outcome for those men.
Yeah.
This is what excites me about Freemasonry is a lot of us are at heart are a bit of a history nerd. And here's the opportunity to talk about this thing that I think a lot of guys came knocking on the door or had an interest in Masonry because they've heard of people like George Washington or Ben Franklin or Paul Revere. I mean, the list goes on, and they're like, I want to learn more about these famous men and what was the connection with Freemasonry and that Revolutionary War and how are they involved? How excited are you that this is that time that we get to have that discussion? And what are you talking with your brothers about in lodge?
Well, and so yeah, it's one of those instances that come, every 50 years or so. Having grown up and been a teenager, show my age here during the bicentennial, so and realizing it has been that long, but it gives us the chance not only to kind of re-explore and rediscover, but also to look at some of the things that may or may not be true and may have just become urban legend as time has gone on. And so that has been one of the things that I've talked with brothers about. And the first thing is to sit and get them to understand, viewing our founding fathers who were part of the fraternity within the context of their time. Right? We so often look at history or historical events with 21st century glasses, which don't give us an appreciation for exactly where they were and what that snapshot in time was really looking at. So that's one of the things. And there's actually a nifty Greek word for it. It's called exegesis, where it literally means to lead out of, where you're to interpret and come up with conclusions based on the context, rather than its antithesis, exegesis, which means you're finding the evidence to support your view, not taking the view from the particular period that it was in. So, kind of going back to how the whole thought started to formulate in my head is within section 2. And it's titled Concerning Government and the Civil Magistrate from Anderson's Constitutions. 1723 originally, the Commonwealth of Virginia and our Grand Lodge, we actually have adopted the 1791 version as the historical guidelines for the craft here in Virginia. But it specifically says that whoever will be a true Mason is to be a lover of quiet and peaceable and obedient to the civil powers, which yield him protection or set over him where he resides and works. Right. And it goes on with kind of that flowery language about being a good citizen, good and upright. And even in our modern installation for officers in the subordinate lodge, the worshipful master, previous to his being invested with the jewel of his office, signifies that he agrees to be a peaceful citizen and cheerfully conform to the laws of the government in which he resides. The second one then was to actually understand kind of the Masonic laws of the period, where ultimately, just a spoiler alert, towards the end, but even today, if you've been charged with nothing else, it's okay to be a little dissentive in what's going on in government. Yeah, we don't talk about politics or religion in the lodge, but we have an obligation to also stand up.
This is the stuff that guys want to talk about, I think, when they come to join a Masonic lodge, not about the bills and the other stuff that we have to do, but they want to hear brothers, and some of us want to contribute to this and bring our own ideas.
What we get the chance to do is hopefully have the conversations of what's true and what's not. What I discovered was within the colonies, I think we ended up with a much more realistic representation of what Freemasonry was ultimately meant to be than what had started to transpire in England. By the 1750s and 1760s, Freemasonry started to become a little snobbish and a bit of an exclusive gentleman's club, more so than a fraternity where folks met on the level. And that was actually part of how the Antients evolved, because Irish Freemasons, the Grand Lodge of Ireland, was only 5 or 6 years in being established from the Grand Lodge of England. So they weren't that far behind, and Masonry, just like in England, existed long before the formations of the Grand Lodge system. But what started to happen was the business relationships between, in particular, Dublin and London started to see a lot of Irish businessmen, merchants, carpenters, bricklayers, machinists, the folks that we would traditionally call the trades, who would be coming to London in order to do business and to set up business, actually being denied not only affiliation, but just attendance in British lodges. And as it happened, by the time we get to the 1770s in the American colonies, pretty much half of all of the Masonic lodges in the colonies were ancients and were coming from that tradition, and were also being fed, though, by charters from the Grand Lodge of Scotland and the Grand Lodge of Ireland, and the provincial lodges out of all of those were also establishing and chartering lodges. So at one point in my research, there's probably more, but I discovered at least 8 different provincial Grand Lodges that had been established in the colonies. There was a provincial Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and New York. There was also the Provincial Grand Lodge of New England. There was one in South Carolina, North Carolina. My favorite one is the Provincial Grand Lodge for North America. You might have one lodge and I'm just going to pick off the top of my head, let's say within Boston, that was chartered by the Grand Lodge of Ireland, and another one that had been chartered under the Provincial Grand Lodge of New England and had a completely different set of ritual that they were visiting. And unlike what they had experienced, in Britain, they were visiting and they were interacting. The other thing that I personally think had a significant amount of influence too is the fact that there were a number of military lodges that existed within the colonies, particularly as, well, one from we call it the French and Indian War in Europe, called 7 Years' War, but same thing, just different theaters. But from the French and Indian War, there were a number of British military lodges that existed and remained because of the garrisons that were left within the colonies. And so those were operating and making Masons, and many of them might have also been chartered by the different Grand Lodges. Just because you were in the British Army didn't mean you were a Mason under the Grand Lodge of England. You might actually be part of an Irish regiment that is got its military charter under the Grand Lodge of Ireland.
We can stop imagining what that is like, and we can open up our lodge archives if we're fortunate enough to have them, and look at those minutes and see who was there and what was going on, and in the history books, and see what these men were actually talking about, and try to put our finger on what the impact of Freemasonry was. Like, how was Freemasonry inserting itself into shaping where we are now, which that's what makes this so cool. Is every time I walk into a lodge, I've realized that I am a living piece of history, and I get to be a part of that, from the pictures and the documents that are hanging on the wall to just being there for the opening and closing of that meeting. We are a part of history. You mentioned this in your presentation, and you dropped it as well in this episode of the podcast. You were talking about Anderson's Book of Constitutions. One of the big, foundational documents for the craft. It literally did basically say, this is the rules of Freemasonry. This is how thou must conduct. But we were also talking about the transition from the British provincial system of Grand Lodges to American lodges and the Blue Lodge system that we're all a member of now. Getting into the politics of it, it was also the removal of the king, because that's what this whole idea of this spirit of independence, this revolution that was happening was, to put it point blank, Americans were tired of having somebody from somewhere else tell them what to do, just like we still carry that same spirit 250 years later. But in a Masonic way, what have you seen or what have you gleaned from that kind of separation from British English Freemasonry to it becoming an American style of a Blue Lodge system?
I want to say evolution, right? And because the entire craft has evolved over the years, I think that's one of the things that this gives us the opportunity to look back on and reflect on. Is there's a certain element of brothers who think that the way we're doing ritual is the way it was done in 1717 or before. And again, when you start to actually look at things, you find out that Masonry has progressed and it evolves, and that's part of the reason why New York ritual is different than Virginia ritual, and Pennsylvania ritual is different than anything that you'll see in any of the other grand jurisdictions that make up the U.S., right?
And it doesn't even have to be the words that we use in the ritual. Sorry to jump in really quick, Wes, but this is another key point because I joke all the time when I see guys that do it. It's also the way that we wear our aprons differently. Whenever I see brothers here in New York that, wear their aprons underneath their jacket because they can't get the button to close, I'm like, what are you, a Virginia Mason all of a sudden? That's how they wear their aprons in Virginia. We did kind of become, our own interconnected but yet still independent style of Freemasonry here in the United States. And I think that's what kind of makes what we do as far as Freemasonry here in the US, that's what makes it kind of special.
Just those little nuances and differences, again, are part of the continuing evolution of the craft. Masonry is not stagnant. We continue to move, and things will change. You adhere to the ancient landmarks, but as 21st century Masons kind of have to wrestle with too. Is this idea, well, how do we include these kind of capabilities and these kinds of new ideas and not limit ourselves? And I also, just as it hits my head here too, which is a completely different topic sometime, but the ideas of the innovations in Masonry. Okay, well, what constitutes an innovation? I could say, so the first time a guy showed up with this candle backlit projector with glass slides that came to be known as the magic lantern. Oh no, we can't do that because we use this trestle board painting thing that we've used forever, and now, well, if you're not doing the lectures with a PowerPoint, which happens to be just a PowerPoint rendered glass image from the magic lantern. So as far as we think we've come, sometimes we're not as far as we thought.
Well, I want to talk about technology because you touched on it. I grew up in Yuma, Arizona. There's not a lot of, American history there, much less colonial American history. It's a tiny little place in the middle of the desert, right there on the Mexican border. But because of technology, there's a lot of resources that are available to connect. We've talked about one here on Craftsman Online. We're super proud to have teamed up with Arizona State University for their online course on what the founders meant by life, liberty, and pursuing happiness. It's a free 12-course module, super cool. I was telling Wes about it before we hit the record button. It's not like one of those online, continuing education things that maybe you got to do for work. There's actually videos and interactive parts that you're going to be like, hey, cool, I can bring this to Lodge and use this as a program. And the best part, it's completely free. What the founders meant by happiness, a journey through virtue and character from Arizona State University in collaboration with the National Constitution Center. You can learn more about it and get started by visiting our website at craftsmanonline.com. That's craftsmanonline.com. Another program you were telling me about, and our brothers from the Scottish Rite Southern Masonic jurisdiction, there's another American 250 celebration education series that's out now.
In the Master Craftsman Online College has a series of 5 different, and we call them mini courses, right? They're ones that you can knock out in about an hour, hour and a half. Doesn't take a really big commitment of time. that walk through the basic history of Freemasonry within the formation of the United States. And so I can just rattle off the five that we've got. One is simply entitled The Great Seal and Freemasonry. And of the ones that I've done, I think I enjoyed that one the most, and it was probably the shortest because, again, hold up the don't feed the conspiracy theorists. It really does lay bare all of the invalid arguments of how the Great Seal on the back of the dollar bill is not a Masonic symbol. But the only thing actually Masonic about it is the eye at the top is actually George Washington's eye from his portrait on the front of the $1 bill. But everything else, again, was just symbolic representation of the period, not drawn directly from Freemasonry. And then the last one I just finished this morning is entitled The White House and the Freemasons. And it's actually the main book and source reference for that is the book of the same name, The White House and the Freemasons, by Chris Ruley, who's the assistant grand archivist for the Scottish Rite. And that was very, very interesting to look through. And not only does he talk about those presidents who were Freemasons, but also looks at the relationship of the office of the president with the craft over, now 250 years of this fine country in which we live. And I say that with every bit of my heart and soul. And so, again, those are the 5 courses. They are available to any Master Mason. If you just go to mastercraftsmanonline.org and sign up, and if you're not a Scottish Rite Mason,
they'll take care of that pretty quick. I'm going to get you out of here on this question because aside from being one of my favorite comic book guys to talk to or just brothers on Freemasonry, Brother Wes in his home jurisdiction is also a lodge education officer. So I'll get you out of here on a ritual-based question because I know you're going to dig this. What's one American history topic that anyone listening, if their lodge is getting together in the summertime in July and talking, that they could discuss from just one line of our ritual? Is there a line in our ritual that you're like, ooh, I'll mention this, and then this could easily become a great evening discussion on something important in American history?
I think one of the things that goes to Freemasonry and also to the Enlightenment. Earlier we talked about, did Freemasonry influence the Enlightenment? Did the Enlightenment influence Freemasonry? Is the idea of deism. Because, again, we don't profess a specific religion. What we require is belief in deity. Right? That is one of the requirements to be an American Freemason. We won't talk about some of the other things on the continent. And it was fairly prevalent within the 18th century as well. As a matter of fact, Thomas Jefferson, who oftentimes is purported to have been a Freemason. I think he had a lot of colleagues who were Freemasons. I'm pretty sure at some point, probably Franklin and a few others were going to, come on, Jeff, let's just take the petition and let's get this done, right? But he was a deist, and a lot of what he rolled into the Declaration of Independence articulates that belief in a higher power. It was Franklin who suggested, the line, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and they are self-evident because they are from a creator, from a grand architect. And so that to me would be one thing that would just be really interesting to dive into, is this idea of 18th century Enlightenment deist thinking and its potential influence on, again, the establishment of the Grand Lodge system and the continuation of that belief in deity within Freemasonry, and then how that gets translated over into where a Christian, a Jew, a deist, a Buddhist, Muslim, all can sit down and meet in a lodge room and have conversations and fraternal bonding with one another without all of the stuff that goes on outside the lodge. And so for me, just that idea of, the great architected universe and that neutral framework is something that I think sometimes, particularly in American Freemasonry, because I think folks will be reticent to say it, but I'll say it. The vast majority of American lodges are predominantly made up of brethren who profess the belief in Christianity. So we don't get that exposure to other brothers from other belief systems. And I think that does us a disservice as part of this global brotherhood, to not really understand that, not everybody has just the King James Bible on their altar. There are places in the world where there are a whole lot of different religions and cultures and philosophies and backgrounds that all roll into this. And again, the exciting part of being a Freemason too, is that chance to sojourn and travel and experience those things. And so with that's, take the 250th anniversary and look at it in the age of enlightenment and explore, how did we get here? And how do we continue to keep this true to the ancient landmarks, but also relevant to, young gentlemen like Val on last evening in my Blue Lodge, who is a whopping 22 years old.
I really appreciate you saying that, because it woke something up in me that I hadn't thought about for a really long time. And, now it's going to help me think about it the next time I get asked the question, like, why do you like being a Freemason? What's so special about it? And, when you get past the green beans for dinner jokes, and you get past the cracks in the sidewalk, during business meeting jokes, and you get past the titles and the aprons and the colors and the fanfare and the pageantry, and you really get to it, it's like, yeah, I joined Freemasonry because I wanted to become a better person by growing it and learning more. And yeah, some of it is what you get exposed to through the teachings that come through our ritual, as you say, in America, over 250 years worth of knowledge is in those Masonic lessons and those lectures and everything you hear. But then the other part of it is what you get now. And I like that you mentioned that part as well, is that it is I get to sit down and have the opportunity at dinner or after lodge, whatever, and talk to people from different backgrounds, different ways of thinking of things, and understanding them and really getting it. And to where I don't feel like I have, my cracks in the sidewalk are full because of the cement and the knowledge that I get from other people. And I feel like a more complete person. And you only get that kind of insight by talking to other people. So I really appreciate you putting it that way. And I hope it encourages more brothers to do this thing called travel. And I hope it also encourages them to speak up more and be active and engaged in their lodge. And that we shouldn't just be doing it when America's celebrating its birthday. We should be doing it every time we get a chance to walk in there. So thank you so much for that, Wes. And again, thank you again for being so generous with your time. Worshipful brother Wes Latchford, appreciate your time here on the Craftsman Online podcast. Thanks again to my guest this week, Worshipful brother Wes Latchford. If you have enjoyed this episode of the Craftsman Online podcast, do me a favor, just tell the coolest brother you know about our podcast and how easy it is to find us everywhere they hear their favorite episodes. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, Patreon, yes, even on YouTube. You can find Craftsman online. I'm Right Worshipful Brother Michael Arce. Next week, it's going to be a good one. Bring your own mug. You have been properly warned so that you can charge it as we get ready to get American punch-drunk Masonic style with Worshipful Brother Cedric Jacobson. Our America 250 series continues next Monday. Until then, let peace and harmony prevail.